Nag, everyone. So moving right along, I want to welcome Dr. Lorraine Greaves, who is a senior investigator at the Center of Excellence for Women's Health and the principal of the Galvanizing Equity Group. She is a leader in women's health and has been central in leading research on women's health in Vancouver and London, and the author of 12 books, who promotes integrating sex and gender in research and policy across sectors. Lorraine is presenting an award today to Dr. Michele Landsberg, a legend, another legend, and someone who I might say is still organizing those of us living in Toronto to show up in the freezing cold on a Thursday afternoon to stand for an end to the genocide.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Senator McPhedran and your team, Dr. Susan Basili and others, for organizing this incredibly important event. It is a pleasure for me to be giving the tribute to another femtor, Michele Landsberg. Michele is a beloved feminist, journalist, and writer. She has, without a doubt, influenced millions to think like feminists, to see lurking injustice, and most importantly, to speak out for change without blanching, calculation, or hesitation. So nothing gives me greater pleasure than delivering a tribute to Michele Landsberg tonight. But it's really a love letter. Michele and I share a deep friendship and love. For over 20 years, we have shared our joys, our grief, trials and tribulations. We've shared an ongoing conversation on political strategizing and feminism, the mysteries of human dynamics, the exhaustion of caregiving, the tenacious forces of aging and ableism, the humor and despair of disability, and endless ongoing family dynamics. We also share more mundane things like muddy clumps of garden perennials, book recommendations, draft manuscripts, Google Maps, and countless meals in restaurants all over Southern Ontario. We have laughed and cried and lamented and ranted. So this is not objective. But growing up in the 1940s and 1950s, Scarborough, Toronto, Michele was subjected to relentless anti-Semitic barbs in the school, the neighborhood, and the city. Shaped by these experiences, at age 19, Michele, the Zionist, went to Israel and worked on a kibbutz. 6.5 decades later, as you have just heard, she was standing at Yonge and Bloor holding a Feminists Against Genocide sign, having led the revival of Women in Black. Michele never stops evolving. She never gets old. She was also subjected to the ravages of sexism at home, at school, and at university. Opportunities were crossed out, dress codes were imposed, all of which she rebelled against. She took English literature at the University of Toronto. She was an avant-garde student, smoking Export A's and following beatnik fashion. And even though she was drenched in the special sexism of the academy, she still felt lucky to be there. Even though she didn't believe in marriage, she married Stephen 6 weeks after they met. And later, after 6 years of staying at home with 3 babies, she read Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystique and lamented, "Where were you when I needed you?" Feeling like she was born too soon, Michele ultimately used journalism to learn and live her feminism. She started her career at the Globe and Mail, then Chatelaine. Later on, she agreed to write the women's column for the Toronto Star. Against her initial impulse, it became the most read column in the Toronto Star. She described her job interview in the introduction to her last book, Writing the Revolution, that was published by the Feminist History Society in 2011. In her words, Marty Goodman, hard-driving editor of the Toronto Star, leaned back in his office chair, fingers laced behind his head, and tried to explain the nature of the job for which I was somewhat reluctantly interviewing. The Star's woman columnist was a job I wasn't sure I wanted. You see the CN Tower over there? He asked, gesturing widely. If I look out and see a man climbing up to the top of that tower, that's a news story. See? I nodded. But if I look out and see a woman climbing up that tower, now that's a woman's story. I see, Marty, I said, keeping a straight face. Suddenly, I wanted the job. Marty, king of his realm and so sure of his wisdom, sat in for all the men I knew who simply assumed their right of leadership. But reader, he hired me. Now I was handed the slingshot to aim straight at the forehead of male hegemony. And she did. So began decades of a flagrantly feminist column in a major Canadian newspaper, reaching thousands of adulatory readers, feeding a pent-up need for everyday analysis of long-simmering injustices. It was 1978. Michele Landsberg follows in the tradition of the American journalist Ida B. Wells, the Canadian journalists Kit Coleman, Flora Dennison, and E. Cora Hind. Part educator, part sociologist, part provocateur, always a feminist activist. In this esteemed company, she carried on these traditions in Toronto and Canada when her instincts told her to reject femininity, question limits on women's place, and sniff out mansplaining before there was even a word for it. Some of Michele's columns were revived in her last book, and I am so glad they were. They show us two things: her acute ability to name women's issues in ways that are readable and infuriating without sparing shocking detail. And secondly, that the many issues she identified, which included every imaginable type of violence against women and children, reproductive rights, reformed school survivorship, toxic shock syndrome, unequal pay, the status of Indigenous women, family law, questionable court challenges on rape, abuse, divorce, immigration, were simply endless and never, ever really resolved. She also wrote about the movement itself, the Women's Political Party, electoral reform, nuclear disarmament, the Royal Commission, the National Federation of University Women, the Canadian Advisory Council, and the National Action Committee. Michele's given me 3 of her minutes. In fact, there was little about feminism's second wave left untouched by Michele. She even covered feminist satyrs, grandmothering, breast cancer, and gardening. She considered atrocities affecting women from Cuba to the Congo, Algeria to Afghanistan. And just as doggedly, she followed the backlash, the poor policing, the utterly misdirected judicial decisions, weak-kneed politicians, the dilution of language, wily defunding campaigns, and even attempts to close women's hospitals. The sexism of it all. In the early 2000s, Michele became the chair of the board of Women's College Hospital during a time of existential threat. And it was then that we bonded over women's health, strategizing, and politics. That institution, as you know, has survived in spectacular form due to her leadership. And of course, she parsed the Charter of Rights, the ad hocers, meat lake. She sank her teeth into all of it. Her contribution to the epic challenge of the equality provision was real. Her columns were particularly influential, explaining the intricacies of that fight, and eventually won a national newspaper award. Simply put, Michele's contribution to illuminating the landscape for women in Canada and around the world is incalculable. She is a scribe and a witness, bringing testimony and moral reasoning about women's realities to the fore in Canada. The great Gloria Steinem once said, "Michele Landsberg understood feminism better than I did." So true. Michele Landsberg, her writings, her messages, and her actions, a moral compass, always on point, always inspiring. Michele Landsberg never gets old.
Thank you to all of you. Lorraine, thank you for that loving, blushful tribute. I'm surprised myself to hear some of the stuff I did. I have to admit, I've had a very tumultuous few weeks, and somehow in the midst of all the uproar and the grief and everything else, it slipped my mind that I was supposed to say a few words here tonight. So now I'm going to gift a few minutes of my 5 minutes to all the rest of you, because I have no prepared speech. But I want to say this. There are so many women in this room who have reached out their hand to me, shared their knowledge, their friendship, their love, their support. It's a spectacular feeling to be here with all of you. Thank you. And I want to say that Marilou in particular, pardon me, Senator Marilou, I remember when, there were so many issues that I didn't really understand because no one had spelled them out. I had to learn them as I went. And I remember when we both were living in New York and Marilou came into our apartment, slammed down a pile of documents like that and said, "You have to write about the charter now." That legal language, my head was cracking. I couldn't bear it. I told her, "No, I can't do it. I hate this stuff." "You have to do it." So I did it. And there are at least 15 more of you in this room who did a similar thing and said, "You have to pay attention to this." So I owe you all. This network of sisterhood has been the sustaining force of my life. It gives me so much love and strength. In all my years of writing fierce columns, I was never once afraid of anything because I had the women behind me. Thank you all. This is a beautiful event. I'm grateful to be here. I'm sorry other people have outlined histories for you and mentioned all the wonderful things that women have done. I just want to say, so good to be here with other feminists in this magnificent hall and to celebrate our achievements. Thank you all.